Welcome to the Chiefs. Ako po si Roby Alampay. Kasama ko po ngayon dito sa Mandaluyong Lingao of One News. Tapos mamaya sasamahan tayo online ni Pamintuan of the Philippine Star. Bok, happy Friday.
Happy weekend.
Oo nga.
Tatlong araw na lang.
Teka muna, doon tayo sa topic natin. What a time to miss an episode. Yesterday, I just want to get...
That was interesting.
Wala ako kahapon. So, wait.
Namalik pa tayo. Sinabi mo niya?
Actually, yun yung gusto kong tanungin. Was that a question?
It was not a solicited remark. In other words, we were not asking him if there were policemen who were wanting to testify. Bigla na lang niya sinabi, I remember he used the word, hindi tumisigay, marami mga police na gusto magsabi tungkol sa EJK pero hindi sila makaano dahil wala silang witness protection. So, teka sir,
he said EJK. He said EJK.
Parang if I remember right, if I remember right, he said EJK. But even then, all our questions after that statement were premised on EJKs already kasi we kept mentioning EJK and he kept responding to that. So, in other words, he did not contest that. In fact, sabi nga sa kanya, parang, sorry, nagulat lang kami kasi it's kind of refreshing to hear a senior government official talk about EJKs in these terms.
If you're joining us now, we're talking about Justice Secretary Remulla yesterday saying that there are policemen willing to be wanting to test.
Wanting to talk, pero natatakot daw sila kasi hindi sila kasama sa witness protection. And therefore, sabi niya, we may need to amend the law on witness protection para maisama sila. And he went as far as saying na we may need to look at possible safe houses abroad for some policemen who would be in danger if they testify.
Really interesting kasi lalong-lalo na nung nakita ko yung balita and I started to look for our videos yesterday because there's a couple of premises there for what he said. One is, as I said, if he used the term EJK, for me that's already something significant because they've been.
I do recall
the
him
previous
using
administration was actually always careful not to say, always to say na wala namang definition man lang ng EJK. And secondly, whatever the investigations entail, and I presume government will still say this is all, we still have to investigate all of these things. But this is the Justice Secretary essentially acknowledging that there are policemen starting off on the premise that there were in fact EJKs. They knew about it. That's also part of the
premise. At sabi pa niya, naiipit sila. Ayaw nilang gawin o ayaw nilang masama. Pero naiipit sila, kaya nasama sila.
Okay, now ipasok mo yung usapin na witness protection program, then you're starting to look for, this is an upward investigation.
It's a prosecution. It's going to be a prosecution
because it cannot
up the line.
Because it's a witness protection program, it cannot be the most guilty, di ba? It has to be the least, not necessarily the least guilty, but if you're the most guilty,
talking about the witness,
kung saan papunta, di ba? You cannot be in the witness protection program if you are the most guilty, di ba? The whole point for the witness protection program is to look for the most guilty, meaning. Did you talk about that? Gaano kataas sa abutin ng investigation?
Well, we asked about that. Sir, okay, you're telling us all about this. What about liability? How far could the liability go if these people do testify? Sabi niya, I don't want to talk about liability kasi wala pa tayo doon. Pero there's such a thing as command responsibility.
Okay. Sige. Policemen as witnesses in EJK cases in the previous Duterte administration. Now, a human rights lawyer was going to weigh in after the break. Keep it right here on One News. Welcome back. Now, last night on the Chiefs, pinag-usapan namin kanina ni Bok, Justice Secretary Boying Remulla revealed that there are law enforcers, this is Justice Secretary Remulla speaking, willing to testify in EJK cases under the Duterte administration.
Marami raw, marami ang ginamit ng word. Maraming law enforcers.
Okay, now what does the DOJ chief statement actually mean to pending cases and this whole discussion about EJK? Sharing his insights is the Deputy Executive Director of the Center for International Law Philippines, Attorney Gilbert Andres. Welcome to the Chiefs again, Attorney Andres.
Good morning to the Chiefs.
Hi, sir.
So, Attorney Gilbert, how significant are these words from Justice Secretary Crispin Remulla?
Well, it's something to look forward to, especially since it talks about EJKs. And it talks about no less than police officers or policemen who are willing to testify. And we know that in any probe, there's always a need for testimony. There's always a need for witnesses. So this is a positive development for me.
Okay, now is there any room here, only because merong mga tao cynical, hindi naman tayo cynical, but kunwari ibang taong cynical, baka naman iniisip na ibang tao, baka naman umaanggulo lang yan, pero para mapasaya ng konti ang ICC, maybe this is just, is there an aspect there that this could just be paying lip service to the objectives and the values of the ICC, or has the statements of the Justice Secretary actually already gone beyond the point na no, this actually carries weight now?
Well, I always want to give a presumption of good faith on the part of this government that they want to really probe what happened during the EJKs under the Duterte administration's war on drugs. But number two, I also want to point out that the position of this administration also echoes the position of the previous administration. Namely, they're saying that we have a working justice system. So I think that's really the aspect they're trying to show to the international community, that there's a working justice system, that in fact, what I think they're doing now is a case build-up. So it's not necessarily a preliminary investigation, but it's a case build-up in the sense that they're looking for witnesses.
Pero sir, the fact that it was the Justice Secretary himself who appeared to be actively pushing, if not proposing amendments, to move forward with the testimonies by law enforcers that would substantiate EJKs, doesn't that mean anything? 'Cause we've never heard anything of this sort before, not in the last 6 years certainly. Before, ang EJK parang was non-existent. It was parang talagang a rare occurrence by bad elements. This time, unsolicited, you have the Justice Secretary saying no, we have policemen who want to testify. That struck us as parang really highly unusual.
Oh, it's really significant that no less than the Justice Secretary is stating this, because in fact it's actually a recognition that there were EJKs, although it doesn't say EJKs during which administration, but we know it's during the Duterte administration. So it's really significant. And number two, the fact that the Justice Secretary no less stated that there are officers, there are policemen who are willing to testify, means to say that they're doing in some sense, a case build-up on this EJKs.
Okay. Now, this is still allowing for good faith, no? But he also did, after saying that, no, he also did say that ang problema is yung witness protection program, eh, 'di ba? Parang may mga pulis gustong tumistigo pero hindi covered. So parang I don't know, is that to say na kaya lang hindi makakapag-testify yan hangga't wala tayong batas? And then we start talking about changing the law, then God knows kung kailan pa aabot yan dito sa mga investigasyon. So when you throw in that additional statement that on the other hand, we're sort of facing a dead end here, or at least a narrow path here kasi wala sa witness protection program ang mga pulis. what does that tell you in terms of how practicable or pragmatic the thought of having policemen testify on this matter is?
Okay, 3 points on that. The Justice Secretary is correct in the sense that in the Witness Protection Act, actually law enforcement officers cannot be entered into the witness protection program except for members of their immediate family. Now, second point, I think the rationale of the law is that these law enforcement officers actually have the necessary skill set to protect themselves. And because of the limited resources that our government has, they would rather give the witness protection program to those who really don't have that skill set to protect themselves. Number 3, I think reflecting on that rationale of the law, if these law enforcement officers are really in good faith, they want to testify, they don't really need to be admitted to the witness protection program because they have that necessary skill set to protect themselves. And in fact, if their only quandary is protection for their immediate family can actually be admitted to the witness protection program.
Pero sir, at the same time, you're also looking at you're looking at PO1s, PO2s, PO3s, SPO2, SPO1. I mean, these are people who are, well, at least ganun dating rango, di ba? Ngayon, sargento and so on down the line. These are low-ranking people who do the shooting, or who do the operations, so they could be vulnerable to people who issue the orders. Wouldn't that also be a possibility?
Well, that's also a possibility, but at the same time, if they're in the low ranks of the police hierarchy, then it appears that they're not the most guilty. Why is this important? Because in fact, if we look at the crimes that are being investigated by the ICC or opened up in the ICC for the Philippine situation, it's really crimes against humanity. And when you say crimes against humanity, these are really implemented by those who are in the higher ranks, whether of the police, whether of the government, because it's based on a policy of attacking the civilian population. So if these are low-ranking police officers, then they appear to be not the most guilty. And in fact, they appear to be not to be the ones to be possibly indicted before the ICC.
Okay.
Sir,
Go ahead.
Sir, let me retweak the question. What are the implications of the statements of the Justice Secretary last night on, number 1, international perception of EJKs in the Philippines, whether or not EJKs really happen in the Philippines? Number 2, public perception as to whether or not EJKs really happen in the Philippines. And number 3, I suppose, anong possible implication ito doon sa rank and file ng mga pulisya in terms of whether or not other people may want to come out and talk?
Oh, well, it's a significant implication because number 1, we always know, and there's record for that the justification of the previous administration for these EJKs, at least for killings under police operations, is self-defense. But now that the Justice Secretary, no less, has said that EJKs, it actually shows that maybe the defense of self-defense will not hold water. Number 2, the fact that there are certain police officers who are willing to testify, this will also encourage other law enforcement officers to also approach the Department of Justice, if possible, so that they can also give their statements. So my hope is that this will snowball into a full-blown case build-up for EJKs during the war on drugs under the Duterte administration.
Attorney, knowing how criminal investigations work, and for that matter, how police operations work, it's not all policemen. Di ba? Parang may mga informant, may mga asset, may mga ganyan. When you talk about the words of the Justice Secretary, potentially reassuring and also encouraging policemen, what are some other personalities in the entire ecosystem of anti-crime operations that may be encouraged as well to say that, well, never mind the policemen not being able to enter the witness protection program, but ako, meron din akong alam. Might this have an impact as well on civilian assets and other informants to come forward?
But it's a good point because, in fact, there are certain reports wherein it says that there are certain civilian assets who were utilized by police officers in the war on drugs. So with this statement of the DOJ Secretary, it might also actually encourage those police assets, those who are not in the police hierarchy, to also go forward and try to give their statements on how they were utilized by the police in these police operations under the war on drugs.
Okay, now in the meantime, dagdagan ko lang yung tanong kanina ni Ed. He asked, ano kaya implication nito sa public perception? Ano yung implication nito sa perception ng ICC at this point?
Well, the ICC actually, the pretrial chamber one, actually issued a directive for in a sense, the Philippine government to give its comment. So maybe this will be also included in the comment of the Philippine government that it will submit to the ICC. Maybe this is me as an academic, maybe they're trying to justify that there are investigations being done in the Philippines and that the Philippine justice system is willing and able to investigate this EJKs. That's only me as an academic saying that.
Oh, sige. Kasama natin si Ami Pamintuan, but while Ami is readying her question, may follow-up lang ako doon. I asked that because kaakibat nitong mga statements si Justice Secretary is also the statement that, we are going to turn over data to the Solgen. The Solgen can be the one to engage with the ICC. I think they're just being careful not to say that this is compliance. They're saying this is courtesy, this is,
Committee.
Diba? This is committee. But you take all of that together, and what is government trying to prove, and what are they, at this point, making a case for in this committee with the ICC?
I think they're trying to give credence to what they're saying, that we have a working justice system. But having said that, there's a very important point that we need to consider. What is really the Philippine situation before the ICC? It's really crimes against humanity, for murder, for torture, for other inhumane acts. So in the ICC, what they will determine is really whether or not investigations are being conducted for crimes against humanity that happened during the war on drugs. So if the investigation really is just to the individual EJKs, I don't think it will suffice to show that there is a honest to goodness investigation on crimes against humanity. It should really mirror the investigations, or at least what the Office of the Prosecutor wants to do before the ICC, which is really crimes against humanity. And when we say crimes against humanity, there should be higher level.
Nakatingin ka sa taas. Nakatingin ka sa
higher
taas.
level officers in the police hierarchy and even in the civilian government. So that's really the issue. Do this case build-up, do these probes that the present administration is doing, does it really mirror what the prosecutor wants to be investigated before the ICC, which is crimes against humanity for murder?
Okay, Atty. Ami Pamintuan is here, joining us from Manila.
Good evening, Attorney.
Good evening,
Attorney,
Ami.
pero may rule din ng ICC, they cannot step in kapag the state can show, they can step in only if the state is unable or unwilling to investigate, di ba? And I think si Harry Roque sinabi na niya, even crimes against humanity, kaya naman natin, meron na daw tayong police citing cases in Marawi, for example, na related to those crimes na kaya naman natin gawin. Medyo mabagal nga lang daw tayo.
Okay. Actually, the very question that you asked, Ami, it was also asked during the oral arguments before the Supreme Court. We were actually petitioners when President Duterte withdrew from the ICC Rome Statute. And what I said there is, in fact, there is actually a two-step process that the ICC asks. The first question really for the ICC is, are there investigations? Are there prosecutions with respect to crimes against humanity in the Philippines? And that's really a very factual question. Yun lang po yung tanong. And when we say crimes against humanity, if we translate it, ito po ay krimen laban sa sangkatauhan. So hindi lang po mga isang patayan, dalawang patayan, kundi maramihang patayan po ito. So the question really is, are there really investigations or prosecutions on crimes against humanity? And if the answer is none at all, no investigations, no prosecutions, then the ICC will not anymore proceed to determining whether the state is unwilling or unable to genuinely prosecute or investigate. Kasi wala nga po eh. And kung wala nga talagang investigation in the first place, wala nga prosecution, that's where the complementary jurisdiction of the ICC comes in.
Pero yun na nga yung sinabi sa amin. I'm just quoting Attorney Harry Roque because he's an advisor of this administration on the ICC issue. No? Yun na nga sinabi niya na meron daw president dyan eh. Sa jurisprudence natin, meron daw ganyang crime eh. He cited, I think, about 3 cases eh. Natatandaan ko lang yung I think they're going to give that argument. Well, they're not going to comply with the ICC request for comment, pero I think yun ang magiging takbo ng kanilang argument eh. But anyway, medyo ganun din ang takbo ng sagot sa amin ni Secretary Remulla that this government, although iniimbitahan nila yung mga pulis na yan na mag-testify, they also don't see any need for the ICC to step in kasi umaandar naman daw ang ating justice system, flawed as it is, saka nagpo-prosecute naman sila.
In fact, yung sagot ko, Ami, it's really based on an ICC pre-trial chamber na decision, which was actually upheld dun sa appeals chamber. Ito yung sa prosecutor versus Jermaine Katanga. Kasi yung issue doon, paano kung wala talagang investigasyon? Paano kung wala talagang prosecution? Kailangan pa ba nating tingnan whether the state is unwilling or unable? Hindi na. In fact, if we be very precise, in Article 17 of the ICC Rome Statute, yung unwilling or unable, ang sinasabi nun, unwilling or unable, genuinely to prosecute or investigate. So meaning to say, dapat may investigation muna or mayroon muna ang prosecution. Kung wala, ang tinatanong ng ICC, genuine ba yan yung investigation na yan? Genuine ba yan yung prosecution na yan?
Di ba open to subjective interpretation yung genuine na yan?
Actually, meron ding sa Article 7, Paragraph 2 at sa Paragraph 3, meron pong mga criteria doon kung ano yung unwilling to genuinely prosecute or investigate or unable to genuinely prosecute or investigate. Ang sinasabi ko nga, huwag na nating tingnan yung unable kasi yan yung mga partially failed state or totally failed state. Mukhang hindi naman tayo ganun. Pero hindi na rin natin kailangan pumunta sa unwilling to genuinely investigate or prosecute. Kasi wala namang investigation prosecution crimes against humanity.
Pero attorney, let's say we all agree na hindi naman inimbestigahan nila Duterte. Malinaw naman di ba? Parang let's say and especially at the level of the state, especially at the level of who ultimately has the design and the authority to have unleashed this on our people. But how does the context change on gauging willingness between the 6-year term of President Duterte na wala nangyari and then a fresh, brand new government of President Marcos? Di ba? Hindi ba magba-back to zero yung ano mo doon? Don't we allow a clean slate for President Marcos to say na, teka muna, parang magdadalawang buwan pa lang ako dito. In the meantime, you heard my Justice Secretary say these things. You heard my Justice Secretary say that we are looking into this. We are going to cooperate, whatever you want to call it. We will engage with the, just don't call it compliance. I mean, isn't the context for a brand new government different from the context of the 6-year term of President Duterte?
Well, I do understand what you're asking, Roby. Okay, 2 points. the ICC will look at the Philippine state as a whole. So whether it's past administration or this administration, so it will just ask for their investigations or prosecution. Now, granting, this is a new administration. So the question really is there investigations for crimes against humanity? And remember, crimes against humanity is in fact criminal under our RA 985, the IHL Act. So kung talaga pong meron silang iniimbestiga, dapat may preliminary investigation. And when we say preliminary investigation, there are specific respondents. There are specific natural persons who are respondents in a crimes against humanity complaint. So meaning to say, may mga pangalan na po yan. Mga pangalan na lang, hindi lang yan mga PO1 or mga SPO1. Dapat yun yung mga highest civilian authorities responsible for that policy of EJKs and one of the highest police officers during that time.
Sir,
Pero you have to establish muna na enough people were killed, diba? Deliberately before you can accuse someone of crimes against humanity. Kasi yun ang sinasabi nila Duterte, na ano lang yun that's regular law enforcement operation yun We have to establish na it's higher than that, na hindi siya yung regular law enforcement. So kailangan imbestigahan muna yung every case, di ba?
In fact, if we look at the crimes against humanity, it can range from hundreds to thousands to millions.
Ano nga?
And in fact, na-fulfill na yung threshold na yan In the crimes against humanity, it's widespread or systematic. So widespread. So pangkalahatan, systematic, may pattern. Na kung widespread lang, alam naman natin, it's on public record na, in fact, dun sa real numbers, there are at least 6,000 killed under police operations.
Yun na nga, sinasabi. In fact, that's a police report. Kaya nga
Yes.
sinasabi nila, we are acknowledging na ganito yung napatay namin in the course of regular police operations. So we have to establish na hindi siya regular police operation, di ba? Before you can accuse someone of committing crimes against humanity.
Yes,
Diba?
and it's a matter of defense. And second point is, in fact, when the Secretary of Justice said EJKs, that's very significant. Because although he did not say EJKs in the police operations or EJKs in the vigilante-style killings, it still is EJKs.
Sinabi niya he's open to the possibility that some of the cases might be EJK. Yan ang sinabi niya. Sabi niya he cannot close his mind being the Justice Secretary to all these possibilities. Yan ang sabi niya. Kaya nga daw gusto niya mag-testify to mga police.
CC decision last year to open an investigation into the Philippines. So that should also be part of the probe. It's not just police operations. It's also vigilante-style killings, which range up to 30,000 killed.
Sir, kabilang ako, sir. Are you handling any of these EJK cases? And if you are, anong epekto ng mga sinabi kagabi ni Secretary Remulla doon sa kaso na hinahawakan ninyo? And moving that forward, if that is the case nga, what are your plans? Is there any way that you can use those statements in moving your cases forward?
Okay. Center Law represents victims of EJKs on the war on drugs. Having said that, although this is a positive development that the Secretary of Justice is looking at certain police officers who want to testify, we still have to wait for the results. Whether or not this will really go into a full-blown affidavit. Kasi dapat po mayroon po silang mga sworn statements, hindi lang po basta haka-haka or sabi-sabi lang. There should be affidavits. And number 3, the clear fact is that there has been no investigation on crimes against humanity. There has been no preliminary investigation. So we're still waiting for that concrete step of a preliminary investigation on crimes against humanity during the war on drugs.
Okay, Attorney, steady lang kayo. We just need to take a break. We will continue our conversation with Attorney Gilbert Andres of Center Law. Stay with us. The Chiefs will be right back.
Welcome back to the Chiefs here in One News. We continue our conversation with Center Law Deputy Executive Director, Attorney Gilbert Andres. Sir, thank you for staying with us and welcome back to the Chiefs.
Good evening.
Good
Sir,
evening.
yes, sir. Sir, I was wondering lang kasi sabi niyo kanina you'd like to wait first for affidavits. But to begin with, could you expect policemen who have no certainty at all as to their status and as to what will happen to them if they do execute an affidavit, would they go that far this early?
Well, actually, if they're really in good faith, if they're really sincere, whether or not they're admitted into WPP should not even be a precondition. Kasi they have the skill set to actually protect themselves. Hindi naman po sila yung talagang ordinaryong tao lang dyan na hindi marunong to defend themselves. So, they should execute an affidavit on that.
Yes, sir. Sir, I understand your point of view, but their colleagues also have skill sets to go after them.
Matataas ang ranggo ng iba dyan.
Diba? It's like pare-pareho naman tayo pero mas marami sila at mas mataas sila.
Oh.
Oo nga. Kaya yung sabi nga ni Justice Secretary, amendahan yung Witness Protection Act. Oo. Pero yun nga, there are also other avenues for them to be protected.
Yeah.
Silang, actually, all it takes is political will.
Yeah.
Now, I've also been, in fact, I'm still a private prosecutor in the Maguindanao Master case.
Pero ang sinabi ni Justice Secretary, pwede daw siya in the meantime, kasi nga sabi ko, ang tagal-tagal na legislation yan eh. Kung i-amend niya witness protection law. Sabi niya, in the meantime, pwede daw maghingi ng protection, ibibigyan daw niya ng protection sa NBI, yung mga police. Yun, pwede po yan.
Ad hoc basis yan. Kasi ibig sabihin, kung nasa WPP ka, talaga may housing ka, provided by the program, meron kang allowance, meron pang ibang benefits. Pero pwede, open naman sa mga ad hoc na mga protection programs.
Attorney, maraming pulis, maraming ranggo ng pulis, maraming ginagampanan. Let's assume that we're at that point na the Justice Department has some kind of a system in place to reassure them to come out. Now, you're a private prosecutor as well. Paint a picture for us na ideally, if you're going to get a policeman to be a state witness under the Witness Protection Program, ideally, this policeman would have been in a position to do what? And he or she would have had access to what?
Okay. It's very significant that you said, Roby, state witness. Because in fact, if it's a state witness, meaning to say, that person actually participated in the commission of a crime. So, like, for example, there were certain state witnesses who were granted that status in the Maguindanao massacre prosecution. So there's actually a need for a court determination. So dun sa court determination, may initial testimony siya. In fact, it's a conditional testimony. Tapos i-decide pa ng court whether admitted yung taong yun sa witness, sa pagiging state witness. So, well, maybe it's safe to surmise na sabi nga if we read between the lines of what the Justice Secretary said, yung pang napilitan lang sila, I mean to say, most probably they participated in the commission of the crime. So, yun nga, they have to be admitted also as state witnesses. Kung hindi pa sila included sa information, So, actually, talagang these are the complications. And they should not be the most guilty. Yes.
So at the very least, they should be able to point above them.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they should be. Yes, that's correct.
May sinabi din si Justice Secretary para, well, I think it will be an incentive for lawmen to testify. Sabi niya, they're looking at the possibility of resettling these police officers na magte-testify sa abroad. Meron bang president tayong ganito? Ginagawa ba natin yun?
Frankly, I don't know of any precedent on that. But sige, actually, in terms of amendments, supermajority naman ang administration eh. In fact, the president can certify this as an urgent bill eh. So if there's political will, madali lang yan ma-amend, yung Witness Protection Act.
Kailangan pa ba ng amendment? I mean, if you promise them, i-resettle namin kayo halimbawa sa US, sa Canada, I'm guessing na these are countries that will be willing to take in witnesses in a drug war, no? Pero kailangan pa ba ng batas yun? Or sabi niya, the DFA can work. Kasi sabi ko, paano yan? You'll have to work with foreign governments if you want to resettle witnesses sa ibang bansa. Sabi niya, DFA ang mag-aasikaso nun. Do we need a law for that?
Actually, it's more of a law to actually admit these law enforcement officers into the witness protection program. Kasi remember, if it's WPP, there's actually a budget for it. It's allocated by Congress. So, kailangan mo ng pera to relocate them eh. So, it's really that amendment na yung law enforcement officers who will testify against law enforcement officers, they can actually be admitted. But having said that, number two, when it comes to relocating to other states, then alam naman, kailangan ng visa yan. Kaya kailangan ng state-to-state na mga negotiations yan. Kailangan ng state-to-state arrangement. So, yan din yung komplikasyon for relocating outside of the Philippines.
Attorney, doon lang ako ulit dun sa side naman ng itong show of committee to the ICC. Ano ba yan? I mean, how tricky is that to cooperate? Like we keep saying, they're very careful not to call this compliance, but you are cooperating already. Once you cooperate, and once there's a show of committee, how much is there momentum that builds there? I mean, is there going to be an inevitable, and you can't just have a show of committee in one step, in other words? Does that actually commit them to, kung may step 1, may step 2 yan?
Okay. Actually, if you really look at the ICC Rome Statute in Article 127, that's actually the article withdrawal. Even though a state party has already withdrawn, it still has the obligation to cooperate. That's in Article 127, paragraph 2. But second point, actually, let's remember that the essence of the ICC, it's a criminal court. And a criminal court doesn't have jurisdiction over the state. Kahit na state party pa tayo sa ICC, the ICC does not have jurisdiction over the Philippines. What it has jurisdiction of are crimes committed in the Philippine territory when we were still a state party. So, in fact, if this will really go to a full-blown case na merong na-indict na specific natural persons, there's actually a mechanism in the ICC for the Philippines to say na, okay, there's a violation of the principle of complementarity. So, in fact, hindi big issue yan for the ICC, whether the Philippines is submitting documents, whether or not the Philippines is not submitting documents, it will not affect the jurisdiction of the ICC over crimes committed in the Philippine territory when we were still state parties.
Okay, maraming salamat. Attorney Gilbert Andres, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Attorney.
Maraming salamat, Attorney.
And now joining us is Senator Francis Tolentino, the chairman of the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee. Sir, maraming salamat for joining us tonight and welcome to the Chiefs.
Good evening,
Good evening, Senator.
Good evening to all of you. Good evening.
Good evening, sir. Sir, ang daming nag-tune in kagabi kahapon doon sa Blue Ribbon Committee hearing doon sa laptops. Of course, ang dami pong pinuntahan ng hearing, pero I suppose in the end ang gusto malaman ng taong bayan talaga sulit ba yung pera ng taong bayan doon sa pagbili ng 58,000 peso laptops na yon? I don't know if you're already able to come to a conclusion on that, or if there is a need for more.
Siguro, let me clarify yung previous statement that you just made. Ang daming pinuntahan. What I did first day, including my previous sugar fiasco hearing, is that to really structure the proceedings. It's
Yes, sir.
not going to be a free-for-all, come what may, throw all your punches proceedings. So what we did was it's phase-by-phase investigation. So we investigate first, we tackle first the pre-bid, and then thereafter, for the second hearing, we will tackle the bid and award. And on the third stage, it would be the implementation. So it's not gonna be a free-for-all. So siguro hindi dapat malito yung mga tao. Now, your question now refers to the conclusion. That will be on the third phase. So we're still on the first phase. So I don't want to jump the gun on what's going to be the output of the first phase and the second phase. So let's just wait how it will evolve.
While we're waiting, sir, I mean, what's the safe premise here, at least on the direction of accountability? Is it on the level of PSDBM, or is it on the level of DepEd, or somehow between the two of them?
Both, siguro both. But again, as I have mentioned, accountability here will be determined by the amount of evidence extracted plus the facts are established. So it's all premature to speculate how it will end. But accountability is always there. Accountability is enshrined in our Constitution. Accountability is enshrined in our laws. So hintayin din po natin po yun.
In the meantime, Senator, si Mr. Christopher Lau, who headed the PSDBM in the previous administration, humihingi siya ng permiso ninyo to travel abroad. Kumusta na po yung status ng request niya? Papayagan niyo ba siya? Are you inclined to allow him?
Yesterday during the last hearing, I opened the proceedings with that administrative matter being laid before the committee. So initially, as a chairman, I don't have the decision to whether to grant that or not. It has to be done collegially. So my colleagues are now being consulted. So next week we're gonna have the decision. Number two, the request of Mr. Lau, though he mentioned the 18th Congress, might impinge on the ongoing investigation. So all of this will have to be decided by the committee and bank, and a decision will be forthcoming most probably next week.
Sinabi niyo rin, sir, na iiksian niyo yung mga mga investigations ng Blue Ribbon. Sinabi niyo na nga ba hindi siya free for all. So from what you're saying, from the initial events, the initial developments in your probe, gaano katagal sa tingin niyo to maglalast? Itong issue na to sa laptop lang.
I cannot prejudge what will happen, what will unfold. But unlike previous investigations, we have agreed that cumulative evidence would have to be done away. If, for instance, it has been established that the bidding date was March 2021, we will no longer allow other resource persons or some of my colleagues to ask the same questions or over and over again. So to expedite the proceedings, because this has been truthfully established. So in effect, it's not shortening, but it's making most of our time, making it more efficient, making the proceedings more effective.
Senator, malinaw naman po yung sinabi nyo that you're still investigating, nasa phase 1 pa lang of 3 as you said. So without prejudice, as best as we can, without prejudice to what you might find out, a simple but I think important backgrounder, if you could. How do you appreciate?
To which case?
How do you appreciate? Yeah, PSDBM, not any particular case, but how do you appreciate the role of the PSDBM right now? Because both in the case of Farmally and then now with the DepEd, you have the end user agency essentially saying, hindi naman kami yung bumili niyan eh, PSDBM ang bumili niyan. And then there's confusion with the public, nagtuturoan, sinabi, hindi, ultimately sa kanila yan, hindi, sa kanila yan. How do you appreciate the role of the PSDBM right now, and how should the public understand the authority and the accountability of the PSDBM?
If you look at the documents, again, this will be borne out by the succeeding proceedings. There are notes, for instance, for the laptop. There are clear, specific requirements or agreements that the PSDBM would defer to the decision of the end user insofar as the specifications, the product, how it would be delivered, etc., etc. But if you're referring to the existing silent clamor of whether PSDBM should be abolished, that's another issue, because PSDBM was created before to really supply government with your ball pens, your staplers, your pencils, etc., etc. So
the common supplies.
I think, yes, CUSE, so common use supply equipment. So I think the issue right now is the PSDBM still relevant? So for me, not as a person, perhaps just watching events unfold, a reasonable person probably would say that this is no longer necessary. We just allow each agency to purchase their own.
Ang sabi naman ng PSDBM, not PSDBM, actually the Department of Health said, kaya doon nila ibinigay sa PSDBM yung procurement for...
So ma'am, you're referring now to another item? Pharmaly. So let me state this at the outset. My committee has no jurisdiction to the Pharmaly case. It's part of the 18th Congress. So that's, they call it functus officio. So if you ask me as an ordinary citizen, I would call for the abolition of PSDBM.
Okay. Okay, kasi ang sinasabi nila, kasi mas madali daw ang release ng funding kung through DBM. Saka, well, because of the name, I guess, ang tingin nila, nandun daw sa procurement service, yung expertise for procurement. Sabi nila mas mapapabilis. But anyway, kung sakasakali, since this is in aid of legislation din kayo, di ba?
But for my job as a legislator and as part of the Blue Ribbon Committee, the decision would hinge on the evidence that will be extracted from all of these resource persons. But as a Filipino citizen, as a watcher of history, I think it has to go.
Okay.
Sir, you mean even for common use items? I ask you this not just as not just because you're Blue Ribbon Committee chairman.
Common use items are now we differentiate with the context when PSDBM was established. Common use items can be purchased online. Common use items can be purchased in office depots non-existent before. Common use items can be purchased even in your ordinary stores. So LGUs, for instance, they know for a fact which store to source with the lowest and lowest price, high quality material. They have their own general services officer, the GSO. So times there's a big difference between the mid-70s and our period right now.
Yeah.
Sa isa yun sa mga nakikita niya ko sa kasakali. Kasi in aid of legislation yan, you will be introducing amendments or rewriting the law or whatever. Nakikita na kayo ngayon.
I have filed several bills before, even during the midst of the Pharmaly investigation. A bill, for instance, that would require the amendment of Republic Act 9184, the Procurement Act. A bill that would clearly delineate the functions of an officer in charge. And this would also likewise affect the sugar mess. A bill that would entail the collaboration among local government units insofar as purchasing, warehousing, and this can also be done by related national government agencies and a lot of other things. I forgot. I think I filed 6 or 7 measures during the last Congress.
Okay. Sir, one more thing about the laptops. I was wondering lang, if it's possible that the suppliers were able to meet the technical requirements in the bid documents, because the technical requirements were not that specific as to what kind of chip or processor is installed in the laptop. I mean, it did not specify in the bid documents that it has to be Intel i5 or i7. Just the speed, in other words. Yung speed lang na ilang gigahertz ang nandun, as well as yung ilang RAM at ilang terabytes yung hard disk, and so on down the line. So in other words, there was room for them to maneuver as far as what quality of chip could be installed.
So I think it will be part of the phase 2 of the investigation, the requirements, the bid documents, the specifications, and even questions as to whether the specs really came from DepEd or it was a pro forma specs coming from PSDBM. I think even if there is, I don't want to jump again the gun on my other colleagues, even if there is an agreement between, for instance, DepEd and Microsoft, it would have to be shared to the committee. So all these software applications would have to be shared by the resource persons, and it will have to be validated, even because we invited COA for the next hearing. So it will have to be validated by COA itself.
Senator, last question na lang po. And this is not about any particular case, but really a question for us citizens. In particular, citizens' participation in transparency and anti-corruption. Alam nyo naman po nangyari dito, di ba? Nung nabalita ko magkano yung computer, lahat ng tao, nakilala ko, ang unang ginawa, nagpunta sa Google, ginugol yung specs, o nagpunta ng Lazada at saka Shopee, at saka nakita ka agad nila, ito lang pala yung presyo niyan. Sincerely, you've been in local government, you've been in every level of government, national, MMDA, you name it. Tama po ba yung ginawa namin? Is our instinct to go online and look at these prices, is that a valid process, or are we missing something about how much more complicated government bidding can be?
That's correct. While there is a difference between what an investigation can produce, can adduce in terms of evidence and the logical conclusion based on existing regulations or laws, no one can prevent what a reasonable citizen can do or should do to inform himself of what is happening around him. And that's part of this process. The citizens are engaged, not because they should be joining the Blue Ribbon Committee hearing, but they themselves, like what you did. You can Google, you can look for the price. It may be correct, it may be incorrect, it may not be updated, but educating oneself is part of the process. It's citizens' participation, though not directly part of the committee hearing. It's part of the dynamics. That's democracy in action. So tanong mo, tama ba yan? It's correct. It's correct. But what conclusion would be produced? It has to be given to the appropriate body. And in this case, the Blue Ribbon preliminarily, and probably I'm not jumping the gun again, on an appropriate court with sufficient jurisdiction. So tama po yung ginawa niyo. Tama po yan.
Okay. Senator Francis Tolentino, Chairman of the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee. Sir, maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat, sir.
po. Maganda kayo. Pasensya na po, nahuli ako ng konti kasi
Okay.
there was miscommunication as to the schedule. But then again, I'll be more than happy to clarify all of this once the investigation is over. Maraming salamat po.
Asahan po namin yan. Maraming salamat po. And
you,
that is
Senator.
it for the Chiefs. We hope what was discussed here will keep the conversation going. Ako po si Roby Alampay.
I'm Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
I'm Lingao. We are One News, all sides, all the time.